Hi. Today we're going to talk about relationships, in particular, breakups. It really sucks when your relationship breaks up, doesn't it? You kind of feel like something's wrong with you, that it didn't work out. Even if you're the one who chose to break it up, you still feel like, well, why did I attract this person? Why did I hold on so long? And so you may feel inadequate yourself and super angry at the other person for not being who you wanted them to be. And if they're the one who left you, then you could really feel victimized or abused. And in addition, there's that loss of connection. Even if it's only been for a few months, there's a bonding that happens biologically. And so when you break up, it's very disorganizing. You've started to intertwine your lives together. And there's the dream. Women in particular have a habit of starting to perceive the possibility of marriage and deep bonding very early in the relationship. Whereas men tend to hold back more, to be reserved until they know for sure that they can make the commitment, until they really know that this is the right person and that they will really want and be able to provide for them. So men, when they make a decision, they're usually more committed, at least for a while. So why does this happen? Why does it seem like there are no good men in the world? Why does it seem like you keep on losing relationship after relationship after relationship and it just doesn't work? What's the formula? What's the trick? As a PhD psychosocial analyst, I've found that at the bottom, at the core of the issue, are early childhood emotional wounds and protective patterns that we develop in order to survive. Because the number one thing that we need as human beings is to be loved. We are social animals, herd animals. And so it actually is biological that we want to connect and to bond with other people. And wanting to feel loved is very, very important. Also think that we came into this world, from another plane, where love was there all the time. And so actually we come into this three-dimensional material plane, and we also experience the loss of that abundant, continuous love, and we haven't quite learned how to connect with that. So we get born into these families, and we are dependent upon our parents, and we love our parents. No matter how horrible they are, we love them because we are love. We are born love. But then we get hurt, we get wounded. Maybe our father leaves us. I had a number of clients in which that was the case. The father abandoned the family. And so the child feels that something is wrong with them, that they aren't lovable, especially if it's a girl, that if she were good enough, her father would stick around. Now, if the father sticks around, he can end up making her feel unlovable by being hypercritical, always finding fault, or he conveys that to her by the way in which he treats her mother. If he isn't loving to her, if he isn't supportive of her, if he doesn't show compassion and graciousness, if he has disdain and disgust, then the daughter is going to identify with that. Even as she tries to separate herself from her mother, it still gets written in the patterning, in the code. And then how does the mother deal with things? The mother teaches us, your mother teaches you how to love, how to be open, how to be nurturing, how to be nourishing. So if that gets tamped down, if you don't learn how to be nurturing and nourishing, then it's very hard for you to bring that into the relationship. And that is also a problem for relationships unless you happen to pick a man who is shut down and doesn't feel like he deserves to be loved. In fact, that's kind of what happened to me in my first marriage, was that my poor husband, he had a mother who was very cold, very shut down. And he married me. And at the time, I was very shut down. I was very cold. I was very emotionally unavailable. And eventually this, I believe, was part of the contribution to why we broke up. But let's look at some of the reasons why relationships break up. Well, they break up because maybe you just weren't a good fit, and you were a little too, you haven't really developed good skills for discerning. You're too desperate, and so you go after anybody that has the right attributes. Or maybe it's hormonal, that you are physiologically attracted to them. There's a chemistry that you experience on an unconscious level, pheromones. Or maybe you were a match for a while, but then you grew apart. Like, you continued to work on yourself and your husband didn't. And then that disjunction makes it difficult to continue. Also, changes in the family dynamic or the family circumstance, like children grow up. And so you've been staying together because your husband is so busy providing and you are busy being the mother, or the other way around, and you're holding it together for the children. The children leave, and suddenly you look around and you don't even recognize the person who you're living with, and you say, maybe it's time, before I get any older, to try something else. So that's one thing that will contribute to the breakup. Sometimes it's in the air. That actually, I think, also influenced the breakup of my first marriage, was that there were a number of divorces that happened around that same year. And so it puts the idea and the possibility in your mind. And my husband was going through a midlife crisis. He was like 9 years older than me. So he was in his 40s. And things had gotten very difficult. He had lost his job while I had been promoted. And he suddenly felt like he needed to break with it all and create a new life. And so that's what he chose to do. Of course, it was really hard for me, but it was also good. So there's this other aspect, which is that sometimes the breakup is part of your life journey, that you learn from the experience and you grow. You can always, if you have guidance, if you have a mentor, if you work on the early childhood patterns. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the patterns that we learn as children through our parents that can make it difficult for a relationship to thrive. So one of the patterns is the people pleaser. This is a child who maybe her father abandoned her, or is emotionally distant, and she learns this pattern of pleasing because she wants to get attention. Maybe there isn't enough to go around, there are too many children. So she learns a pleasing pattern. And you would think, and in fact in some cases it's true, that pleasing will maybe hold the relationship together for a long time because you don't create any waves. But underneath is this: pleasing is not about pleasing the other person. Pleasing is about getting the love that you want. So it's a manipulation. And if it doesn't work, you get angry, you get frustrated, and you start taking it out on the other person because what's the matter with them? And then you pretend, oh no, I wasn't, I was good, it wasn't me. But it was you, because it's a very passive-aggressive approach, and it can just tear the life out of a relationship because, there's constantly those zingers. Now, a similar pattern, but different, is the person who gets really small, really tiny. And sometimes this is because the partner is a bully, and so they've learned to be small because it's safe. And appeasing because they don't want the person to get really angry or blow up. But like the pleaser, the shrinker is not authentic. They're not really there. They're not showing up. And so the relationships gets boring after a while because there's nothing there. So what else? So there's the controller. You may develop a pattern of controlling, maybe from your father or even your mother, where you feel unsafe. Maybe your childhood was very chaotic, and so you have to hold things together. And you could be a bully and get your way, or you could be the martyr. These are all controlling patterns. The martyr, so you do everything, and how come you're not getting what you want? You're only asking for this little bit. A victim is also a controller, and that can be a very, very difficult dynamic to live with. Somebody who is always a victim and literally attracts terrible things to themselves. And an iteration of that is somebody who gets sick, and then they get attention by being sick all the time. And it's a lot of work to take care of somebody. And eventually it can get old. And eventually, if you stay sick, you can end up dying, or the person can abandon you. The person can finally say, I've had enough, I want out. Another controlling pattern is the hero. Now, you wouldn't think that the hero would be a bad pattern, but the hero is somebody who always comes in to save the situation, to take care of things. Well, sometimes it gets tiring to play damsel in distress. Even if you're a man, damsel in distress, where the other person's always, you feel infantilized, you feel you lack confidence, you don't know who you are, and eventually you decide that you need to go out and find out who you are, and so you leave. The other pattern, and it's interesting, I'm now kind of putting them into 3 categories. So the third one is the perfecter-performer. In both cases, the individual is focusing on the attention outside, but by becoming big and very successful. And oftentimes the success and the focus of the perfecter-performer is not on the relationship. It's on these outward signs, or maybe attention of a lot of people, because that's the need, is to have many people affirm. That one person isn't enough. That if this person affirms you, there must be something wrong with you, them, because of course you're no good. So you have to keep on proving yourself all the time. So those are the dynamics that get in the way. And I've talked about the ways in which breakups happen. And then what? How do you change? Well, you have to work on the patterns. You have to work on the patterns because all of them are about trying to manipulate the universe to give you what you want, love. What you need to learn is that the love is within you. You need to learn to love yourself. And that requires healing. It requires healing those early emotional wounds that told you that you were not lovable, that you were not okay, that you were not perfect, that you were not enough. And the only way to do that is to go through them, to release the emotional energy around them, and to create new stories around what happened, to create a new story for yourself, to empower you, instead of to see yourself as a victim and that the world is unfair. It means becoming confident. So it's interesting, in my own story, I actually had a lot of confidence around attracting men, huge confidence, partly because my mother was a very attractive woman, and she reinforced the beauty in her daughters, reinforced their attractiveness. And so I always had an easy time attracting men. Just had a hard time keeping them. Well, I could keep them for a while. My first husband and I were together for 15 years. That's not a small amount of time. But eventually, that abandonment did happen. And I had to do the inner work in order to make my second marriage work. Otherwise, the patterns, and there are certain ways in which those manifest, those patterns like of expecting that somebody's going to abandon you, is that you look everywhere for signs that that person is going to reject you. You look for signs of rejection. And here's the thing. If you look for them, you are going to find them. They will be there. There are probably other signs that things are okay, but you will look, and the more you look, and the more you react, and the more you shut down and you put the shields up again, the relationship won't survive. It's a killing pattern. Maybe when I was a little infant and my father abandoned me, he didn't really, he just was transferred to Japan, but I perceived it that way. Maybe the fact that I shut myself down and my father didn't know how to re-engage the relationship, or maybe he was too busy. But as a 2-year-old, I didn't know how to do it. I just survived. So a client of mine who is in a relationship still is working with me to improve their relationship. Her problem was that she had a very, very critical father who made her feel worthless and unlovable. And yet she modeled herself after him and also protected her heart from his criticism. And she's been married for a long time, and yet these patterns are still there. Helping her to regain her self-confidence has been key to changing the relationship with her husband. She and he have been going to see a therapist for years. And in a few short months, she has transformed in huge ways. And a lot of it has to do with developing that self-confidence and taking action. It's not like, I come along and give you a little pill and you get self-confidence. It takes action. It takes courage. It takes doing things. And that's what she's been doing. Another client of mine, she lost her husband after 30 years. 30 years, can you imagine? Her husband walked out on her. He came in one day and he said, "I'm leaving." He'd gotten a new job. She thought, oh, finally, he's going to contribute. And he left her. And it took a while for her to even be able to absorb the impact of that, because that's a long time of getting used to each other and spending time together, even though it wasn't working. And there's a lot of inertia that happens in relationships. You consider the idea of starting all over again, and if you're past middle age, or you're in middle age, the idea of starting over again seems like impossibly awful. And so there's that inertia. I actually have a lot of respect for the person who pulls the plug, who decides that it's not working anymore. Because usually it isn't working anymore for either side. And to have the courage to go and leave is huge. Now, when my husband left me, my first husband left me, he actually had a woman waiting for him. And that is a technique that men are known to use. Although in the case of my client, her husband didn't. He didn't leave for another woman. He just left. So I enabled her to see how courageous he was for doing that, even though I also recognized that she was mad as hell at him, that he wasn't willing to work it out. And that's the other thing. Are you willing to do the work? Marriages are work in progress. They take effort. And if both parties are not willing to do the work, one person can't really do it on their own. Although I have found that as you start to change, the other person often does change. If you are interested in what I've been talking about, if you would like to know more about how I work to improve your chances of bringing love into your life, if you are going through a breakup and you would also like the help in getting over the grief and trauma of that, have a conversation with me. You go ahead and schedule a phone call with me, 15, 20 minutes, find out how I work, find out what my fees are, and whether we're a match. That's all for today, and be brilliant. Bye for now.